Okay, so in the topic of genetics, we talked, those are the characteristics that get passed from one generation to the next. Well, when it comes to these characteristics that can be passed from one generation to the next, we can divide all those characteristics kind of into two categories. There's one category that we call species characteristics. In other words, every member of that species has those characteristics. Unless there's maybe some genetic defect or something like that. But if they're normal, they have these characteristics. So, in other words, if it's a dog, there's certain things that we normally associate with every dog. 4 legs, a tail, ears, that actually stick out of the outside the body. The teeth in the mouth kind of always the same. They have claws on their toes, but they're not retractable, are they? They're not like a cat that can retract the claws. Okay, so those would be examples of species characteristics. But then each person or each organism within a species has certain specific characteristics that are unique to them. So back to the dog, let's say. This dog has little tiny short legs, like a dachshund. Has a pointy nose, long ears, usually brown, right? But I guess there's some black dachshunds, aren't they? But so those are what we mean by unique characteristics. Or for humans, since it's kind of talking about us, unique characteristics that make you you would be what color your hair is, what color your eyes are, how tall you are. Now, what would not be called an individual characteristic is maybe like how you wear your hair. Because, you could come, I could see you tomorrow and you had done something to your hair and be entirely different. So it's not an individual characteristic. It's a characteristic that you would have just going forward. Okay? Even though Jake had blonde tips on his, which are slowly going away, his hair is really not that color, is it? That's not his individual character. He can choose to do that with it, to make it have blonde tips in it. Okay? Now, what makes you you? In other words, how do we get the you that we get to see? Well, obviously, it's going to be dependent upon the genes that you inherited. And some characteristics are, we use the word dominant, and some are recessive. Some show up more often than others. Like, for instance, when you guys all leave at the end of the day, I can tell that you're all brothers and sisters because you look an awful lot alike. And then others of you, you probably look quite different than your siblings. One example of where I think is the most difference that I've ever seen within a family is, I don't know if you've ever seen Mrs. Schrog's sisters. They don't look anything like her. And they don't look like anything like each other. I mean, it looked like somebody just randomly picked 5 kids. Oh, you're going to get these 5. They're that different from one another. Some have, like Mrs. Schrog has really dark brown hair. She has a sister who has blonde hair. She has one sister that has, like you two, that have kind of light brown hair. They don't even look like their sisters. So that's possible, So that's what we mean by inherited genes. Now, the other thing that affects that is your environment. The impact of the environment on you. For instance, like your book talks about it, let's say that you have genes to be 6 feet tall. Well, that depends on where you live as to whether or not you'll ever attain 6 feet. If you live where you have plenty to eat and you get all the right vitamins and minerals and all those things like that, you probably will get to be 6 feet tall. But there can be other things that, you know, if you live where you barely have enough to eat to survive, you're probably not going to get to 6 feet tall. You know, maybe in the 5 foot something, but you won't get to 6. So your environment has some impact on how you look. And then your spiritual nature. That's one of the things that I have probably noticed the most over my lifetime is sometimes you have people who are unbelievers and they have a lifestyle that is really just hard on their body. Just put it bluntly. You know, they look like they're already in their 60s when they're really only in their early 40s. And this is it. And then they come to know the Lord and accept Him as their Savior, and you know they often change their entire lifestyle, and you see them a year or two later, and my, they look younger than they did a couple of years ago. They look younger, you know. So your spiritual nature and how that impacts you. Also, people who tend to be stressed out a lot, you know, and worry a lot, things like that. It tends to make you look older, you know. People who are very, you know, they just trust God like that. They usually have a lot smoother, less wrinkles, let's say it that way. So all these things make you you. So when we see you, we see a mix of all those things that make you who you are. Now, as we talked about genetics, and you inherit genes from your parents, both of your parents, this is, you know, both of those are former presidents. One's the father and one's the son. And you can clearly see that this man gave that man some of his genes, right? Because he looks like he belongs in that family. Because he looks like his dad. But if you look at his brother, who was a governor of Florida, his name is Jeb Bush, he looks a lot more like Mom. So you're a mixture, and what mix you happen to get from your mom and dad is different quite often, as in Mrs. Schraub's case. Looks like every one of the 5 girls got an entirely different mix, you know. Whereas, you know, I can tell that Jake and Nate are brothers, you know. They look similar. And I guess we can say that Malin and Joella must be somehow related. Still, I will get your names eventually before you graduate, I think. That's my goal. Now, when it comes to our understanding of genetics, it's kind of evolved over time. We know that from records that we've found is that people living a long time ago, this is King Hammurabi, he lived at 1750 BC. Just to kind of put it in context, Solomon lived at 1000 BC. So this is 750 years before Solomon. So we're probably talking, now we're getting back to about the time of Abraham. That's when this guy lives. And they use selective breeding of plants. Now, I'm not sure that this is necessarily an example of that selective breeding of plants to produce certain varieties that they were interested in, but here's what's interesting. Okay, this is what a wild mustard plant looks like, but through selective breeding, selecting certain characteristics that the wild mustard plant has, we have gotten all of these different, they're all the same, from the same species, they're just different varieties of the same. Kohlrabi, have you ever heard of that? Most people are eating this part right here. There's kale, where they eat the leaves. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, and cauliflower. They're all came from that. They don't look anything alike, do they? But so inside of that wild mustard plant were all the genes for every one of these, but when they were in one mix, one combination, you get this. Now, if you select of it, that means you're saying that certain genes I don't want to have. So in other words, I don't let those plants mate to make offspring. So I'm just selecting out the traits that I want. I mean, all you have to do is look at all the different kinds of dogs there are. They're all dogs, but you can have that big a variety within the dogs. So the genetics has been around, or the practice of genetics has been around a long time. Aristotle believed that the way traits are passed along in humans particularly is that there were particles in the blood, and they would get together and they would make you, the child. So it was a particle carried in the blood, and then each parent gave a portion of that to make you. Have you, your book points out this fact. Have you ever heard of somebody call somebody that he's my blood relative, as opposed to marrying in, I guess is what the other side is. Like, for instance, Lexi Dick, that was a teacher upstairs, would be my wife's blood relative, but I just married into that family. Okay, but do you see where the blood relative idea comes from? It actually comes all the way back from Aristotle, who lived long before Jesus lived. Hundreds of years before Jesus, that's how they thought you got your characteristics. Then after them came some people who said, no, it's not like that. Actually, and we call them the preformationists. They believe that in the male sperm was a tiny little you inside of it. Your dad's sperm had a little you inside of it. And all it needed to do is just grow up to be you. Well, they also thought that that little person inside of there also, if they had a sperm, would have another little you, and you just keep going back like this. So their thought would be that all the way back to Adam and Eve, Adam, in his first sperm, had all of you inside of it. This all had to grow up in their own period of time. So that's how they thought about it. Okay, it's not the way we think today, obviously, but that was their understanding of how genetics came about. This guy, the first guy right here, Gregor Mendel, was a monk. He lived in a monastery, and monks that live in a monastery all are given jobs to do. Like some work in the kitchen, some clean, some keep track of the money, let's say. They're like bookkeepers. And Gregor Mendel's job was to garden. And as he gardened and would plant all these different plants and grow them, and he would spend a lot of time out in the garden, I guess, would figure out, what if I crossed a tall green pea plant with a short pea plant? What's going to happen? And he would record the results. So a lot of what we know about genetics come from Gregor Mendel. He called them factors that control these traits, which today we would call genes. So we call him the father of genetics. Where somebody's finally thinking the correct way about inheritance was Gregor Mendel. He's the first person. Now, another big help in this topic of genetics were Watson and Crick. We've had their names brought up before when we talked about DNA, and they're the one who actually figured out the molecular structure of DNA, which is actually a chromosome. So we give them, so in this history of genetics, those are some major contributions toward that. So, genes, okay, this is one thing we'll talk a lot about is genes. A gene is just a section of a DNA molecule, and we talked about that in the last chapter when we were talking about how DNA unzips, transcribes messenger RNA from it. Well, a section of that DNA are genes. And what do? They produce a particular polypeptide chain of amino acids. Okay, that's a repeat from the last chapter. But they cause a specific trait. So there's a gene for your characteristics, why you look the way you do. Some of these characteristics that you have are controlled by more than one pair of genes. For instance, like height. If you look at adult height, there's all kinds of possible adult height. So there's got to be more than two possibilities, tall and short. There must be, so there has to be multiple genes causing those. Or look at skin color. Look at all the possible skin colors that you can have if all are exposed to the, let's say, the sun in the same amount. So, you know, there's multiple genes. So you can have all possible combinations of skin color. The chromosome, you know, most of you, when you see this picture, you think, okay, that's a chromosome. Well, they don't always exist like that, or don't always, let's say, look like that. This is the DNA molecule, but when it's all wound up tightly, it looks like this. But it isn't always wound up tightly like that. These genes that are on that DNA molecule are fundamentally identical in type and amount. So every cell in your body has the same number of genes, the same types of genes. Every cell. Now, one thing I'm going to introduce to you that we'll talk a little bit more later on, every cell in your body, like the cells that make up your big toe, have the complete plan for you. But not all genes are turned on at all times. An example of something that might turn on a gene, if you look at, well, let's say upper elementary. Upper elementary boys and girls pretty much look pretty similar, other than maybe girls wear long hair, maybe not, you know. But they don't look all that much different. But then when puberty comes along, certain genes get turned on, right? And girls start looking like women, guys start looking like men. They get a certain gene got turned on to produce those characteristics that weren't turned on before. So the genes aren't all being used at all times. Only the parts that need to be get turned off and on. So that makes this process a little more complicated, is, you know, which ones are happen to be turned on. Sometimes we have certain genetic diseases where a gene got turned on when it should be turned off. And those are probably one of the more easily controlled, if somebody has that kind of a defect, is that we've figured out maybe certain medications or certain chemicals I put in their body can turn that gene back off. Now, as long as that's not a bad thing, you know, turning it off. Now, genes are fundamentally identical in both type and amounts in the cells of your organism, of each organism. In other words, you have the same genes for the same things as your neighbor does. Now, which variety of that gene you have will make you look different. That gives you those individual characteristics. But the genes for your species characteristics, the fact that, you know, where our ears are located on our head are different than they are on a dog. You know, they're not up on top, you know, like they are in a dog. You know, that's because our kind of genes are different than theirs, you know. Now, these genes are the chemicals that function as the individual units. So those 3 nucleotides that we got in the last chapter are that's the gene. Some characteristics, as I said a moment ago, are controlled by just one single pair. Others are controlled by multiple pairs. Height, skin color, hair color, texture, you know, all those things. And genes are able to carry information for the formation of chemicals. So that, remember we talked about that protein synthesis? That's what the genes do. Those genes that are turned on will make certain proteins. They're not always making all the proteins all the time. They're just when they're needed. They get turned on and turned off. So they're responsible for biosynthesis, life-making chemicals. Now, genes are able to reproduce themselves. So every cell in your body came from one cell. So if that was the sperm that fertilized the egg that made the first cell, as it grew in size, it finally got to a point where it needed to divide, and it needed to copy all the genes so that the new cell that's formed can have an exact copy of it. And that keeps going on until you are as big as you are today. And that process has worked pretty good, hasn't it? You don't have one part of your body that looks like somebody else. You know, it still looks all like you. So that process of duplicating itself or reproducing itself has gone on very well. You know, practically 100% efficient. Like 99.999999%, you know. Now, genes are the ones that get passed on to the next generation. So your parents pass it on to you, their parents pass it on to them, and we go all the way back to Adam and Eve. But these genes have been passed on for many generations, and everything that we have came from them. You know, we're not making new information. We are just, you know, whatever our parents passed on. Genes are found in the cells and the nuclear material. Where is the nuclear material at? Where's the nuclear material found again? I think we had that a couple chapters back. What does the name kind of imply? Nucleus, maybe? Okay, nucleus. So, in the nucleus we have these chromosomes. Ordinarily, if you look at the cells, if we take one cell of your body and we would stain it so we could see the different things inside of it, we would find the nucleus, but we don't see chromosomes. Not because they're not there, because in their normal state or normal activity, you can't see individual chromosomes. They only need to be individual like that when the cell is getting ready to divide, you know, to make another copy of it. So this strand of DNA is what makes up the chromosome. In that video that I showed you last week, they talked about some proteins called histones. Well, the DNA gets wrapped around these histones to give it some structure, as we'll get here in this next, well, a little bit later on, I guess. It's not this very next slide. But this is what the nucleus ordinarily looks like. Notice you can't see any chromosomes. Right? They only appear when they're getting ready to divide. This is what a non-dividing cell will look like. If you stain it, you can't see the chromosomes. But they're there. Okay, now back to this protein called the histones. They help support it and protect it so that the DNA doesn't get broken. Now, we know that chromosomes can be broken by certain chemicals and cause mutations that could ultimately end up with cancer or something like that. So the purpose, though, of these histones is to keep that DNA tightly wound up so that they're more protected and not as easily damaged. So when you look at a chromosome in a lot closer detail, what you have is it's actually been duplicated. And we call each duplicate a chromatid. So this is, and they often refer to it as like, this is a chromatid and that's its sister chromatid. And somewhere along in here is a structure called a centromere that is kind of like a little button that holds it together. And it's not always exactly in the middle, because remember when, no, we haven't had that yet. That was a couple hours ago. But it's called a centromere. So it has two parts to that. They're called chromatids. It's not the number of chromosomes that determines what species you are. In other words, if I look at a cell that's dividing and I count the number of chromosomes, I can't tell you exactly what species it is. Because there's nothing magical about the number. Your book even says, lists off, I think it was like 3 different organisms that had exactly the same number of chromosomes. I don't know if it was 14 or 24 or something like that. Have the same, they're all different organisms, but they have the same number of chromosomes. Nor can you tell, like for instance, evolutionists would like us to believe that as things evolved and became more complex, you'd think that, well, they would need to have more chromosomes. There are actually organisms out there, like certain plants, that have like 3 or 4 times as many chromosomes as we do. They're not more complex. They're just a different organism that God created. So the number doesn't make one more complex than the other, but the number is unique. Everybody in here has exactly the same number of chromosomes as I do. We all have the same number of chromosomes. Okay? In humans, it's 46 chromosomes. We often refer to that as like 23 pairs because they always occur as a pair. We have 2 chromosomes that have genes for the very same things on that chromosome. The next chromosome is different than these, and have genes for their own things on that chromosome. So they occur as pairs. This picture right here is if they were to take a cell, and this would be like a human cell that was dividing, and they would look at or stain the cell so they could see the individual chromosomes, and then they would take pictures of it. Then they'll take these pictures and arrange them from largest to smallest. So this would be the biggest chromosome would be called number 1, and the shortest one would be like number 38. These are different. We'll talk about those in a moment. And then if there's 2 of them, I think the same size, then they go by where was that centromere? Is it in the middle or is it close to one end? I don't know how they decide that part. But they actually how they number it. Now, there was, my wife talked to somebody in the last couple of weeks, maybe the last couple of months, could possibly be. I think there was a baby born and it had a certain defect, and they were able to figure out that it was a defect in a specific gene on a specific chromosome. They knew exactly which chromosome it was and what gene it is that's causing that. I think had the parts of their heart were backwards, and so blood that ordinarily leaves the heart and goes to the lungs and then comes back again to the heart and then goes out to the body and then comes back to the heart and then repeats that process again, was just reversed. And when you're first born, your heart has two halves, and the bottom part is allows a mixing of blood. So while the baby was very young, they can survive like that. But the only way they could fix that problem is to have an organ transplant. So they went, forget how many weeks, 7 weeks, I think it was, before they found a heart to transplant, to fix that problem. So, but they were able to identify exactly what genes. There isn't always a way, to fix all the genes that are in your body, because you're made up of many millions of cells, and you can't fix all of them. So in this case, it manifested itself as a heart that had serious problems, had to be replaced. Now, these two down here, X and Y, have to do with what sex that individual is. And since it has an X and a Y, is it a male or a female?
Guy.
What?
It's a guy.
It's a guy, right? Has an X and a Y. If it was a girl, it would have
X and X.
an X and X. You have two X's, okay? So this is the difference between a guy and a girl. So the chromosomes occur in pairs. Each member of the pair is called a homolog. Homo means the same, so in other words, it contains all the same genes for all the same characteristics. Okay, so individual chromosomes of a pair are called homologs. Both homologs in a pair have genes for all the same characteristics. This chromosome over here has genes for other characteristics. But every gene controls its own set of characteristics. Now, it's possible, like I said, there could be genes on multiple chromosomes that are working together to produce a certain trait, like how tall you are, or skin color, or something like that. We think it's also has something to do with like intelligence. There's a lot of things that could occur in pairs. I mean, where we would have multiple pairs working together. That's what I meant to say. So you have a pair for every kind of chromosome. We have 46 chromosomes altogether, 23 pairs. When you have 23 pairs, we say you are diploid. Di means what? Two. Okay? You have two of every kind of chromosome. So you are 2N. So N is like the number of pairs we have. We have 23 pairs. Other living organisms will have a different N number, but for us, ours is N, is 23. We have two of everything, so we have 46 chromosomes altogether. Okay, so this describes a cell that has also has its homolog with it. Humans, it's 23 pairs, so our N number is 23. So 2N is 46. We're diploid. Every cell in our body is diploid, with the exception of sex cells that our body makes. Sperm are only half that. So we only have 23 chromosomes, not 23 pairs, just 23. 23 different ones, not just any 23. 23 of each kind, and then mom produces 23 as well, and to put the two 23s together, we're back to 46 again. So that's how sexual reproduction takes place. So N is, the word for N, just having one of each pair, is called haploid. So sex cells, sperm and egg, are haploid. And two haploids make a diploid. I think this is the point where we're going to stop right here. Tomorrow we'll start with the actual cell division process. When cells divide, or the whole life cycle as such. Okay?